Hey everybody, so today we are continuing our season previews for the upcoming NHL season, and we're going to be talking about my favorite team, my hometown team, the Boston Bruins. Before we get into the video, I just quickly want to say if you're not yet a subscriber to this channel, please hit that subscribe button and follow along for all the hockey content this season. And if you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit that like button. It really helps the channel a lot and is greatly appreciated. So the Boston Bruins went to the Stanley Cup final last year, lost in 7 games to St. Louis, but really was one of the better teams in the league much of last season. I personally did not expect them to go as far as they did. I thought they were a good team. I didn't think they were a Stanley Cup team, and they ended up being a Stanley Cup level team last year. Fortunately for the Bruins is they return basically the same team. It's not exactly the same. They lost Marcus Johansson in free agency. They lost Noel Acciari in free agency. But for the most part, they are returning pretty much the same group. And this is a very, very good lineup, a very, very good team, and a team that I expect to be right near the top of the league once again this season. So let's take a look at their projected lineup here. For lineups, I use cap-friendly depth charts and daily face-off line combinations and kind of just base it off of what those sites have. And if there's anything in particular I want to change, I might switch a couple things around, but those are where I get the basis for my lineups from. Also, Boston being my favorite team and team I follow the closest, I know a little bit more about this roster and this group than maybe some other teams, when I'm putting their lineups together. So the top line is not going to change. It's Brad Marchand, Patrice Bergeron, and David Pastrnak. And that is one of, if not the best lines in the entire NHL. Just incredible goal scoring, incredible talent. They play so incredibly well together. The chemistry is just unbelievable sometimes. That they will once again just be phenomenal as their first line. Second line, Jake DeBrusk and David Krejci, who have been together for a few years now. And I have Carson Kuhlman playing on the right side. I think he has the fast track to that right wing spot on the second line just because he was there at the end of last season and in the playoffs. He played a few games on that second line on the right side. So Kuhlman, I think, that's definitely, as far as holes in this lineup go, that is probably the biggest hole in this lineup is second line right wing. It's been an issue now for a couple of years for Boston. They just can't seem to get anyone to consistently fill that spot. Kuhlman, I think, is going to get a decent crack at it this year, given how he played last season. Third line, Danton Heinen, Charlie Coyle, and David Backes. It's going to be interesting to see if what we get out of David Backes this year. If he does get the chance to play on this, or if they try a younger player on that third line with Coyle and Heinen, and maybe Backes ends up being an odd one out in the lineup. But for right now, I have David Backes there. And that leaves the fourth line, Joakim Nordstrom, Sean Corrali, and Chris Wagner. Overall, this forward group is very good, very deep. Premier first line, very good second line. Third line is going to remain to be seen what we get out of them. Danton Heinen did not have a very good season last year, but Charlie Coyle, who came over at the trade deadline, now gets a full season with the Bruins. He was phenomenal in the playoffs for Boston. So I'd like to see that carry over into this season. And if that does, then I think he's going to boost the third line a lot and make them a lot better than what they were last year. And the fourth line, Boston's fourth line is always solid. It really, in recent history, always has been. But they've got a really solid fourth line, a physical fourth line who can chip in some offense when needed. Exactly the hard-working type of players you want on a fourth line. So overall, I think this forward group is very, very good. Moving on to the defense, the defense is pretty well set for right now. Zdeno Chara and Charlie McAvoy is still your top pair. Torrey Krug and Brandon Carlo, your second pair, just like last season. Third pair right now is Matt Grzelcyk and Connor Clifton. Clifton ended up playing a decent number of games last season and in the playoffs for them. But they've got John Moore and Kevin Miller both starting the season on the injured list out with injuries. So Clifton's going to get a spot in that starting lineup. Goaltender, obviously Tuukka Rask coming off a very, very good season and an even better playoff run with Jaro Halak backing him up. And Jaro Halak was phenomenal as the backup goaltender last season, playing 40 games, having a .922 save percentage and a 2.34 goals against. Boston's season could have gone very bad early on when Tuukka Rask was not playing well. Jaro Halak basically came in and took over the starting role for a little while there at the beginning of the season and played extremely well, kept the Bruins winning games, kept the Bruins near the top of the standings. And then when Tuukka Rask came back and got everything under control and started playing like Tuukka Rask again, the Bruins were in fine shape because Jaro Halak was so good. So we'll see what he looks like this year. Consistency has been an issue throughout Halak's career. Putting back-to-back good seasons together has been an issue throughout his career. So that's going to be interesting to watch this year. But as a backup, I think he'll be fine. As far as extra players go, Kevin Miller and John Moore as defensemen are both on the injured list right now. Miller missed most of last season. He ended up breaking his kneecap twice, and that is still an injury that's plaguing him. That just sounds incredibly painful and difficult to deal with. And John Moore is injured as well. But when they're healthy, they're likely to get spots in this lineup. At least one of them will get a spot in this lineup if they're both healthy. Steven Kampfer as a depth defenseman is a, he's nothing spectacular, but he certainly is an adequate depth defenseman without a doubt. So he's there as well. And then you have some younger players like Jeremy Lauzon and Jakub Zaboral, who have been in the AHL and will be looking to get called up if there are any injuries or anything where they need to really go down into their depth for defense, like they did at one point last season when I believe they had 4 of their starting 6 defensemen out with injuries at one point last season. And they did have to go down and pull a lot of minor leaguers up to play defense. As far as extra forwards go, Par Lindholm and Brett Ritchie were both brought in free agency and will likely serve as extra players or potential fourth-line guys. And then they have some young players there as well. There's been a lot of talk about Jack Studnicka possibly making the team right out of camp. I personally would like to see him do a year in the AHL first. He was in junior most of last season, went to Providence in the AHL at the end of last season and for the playoffs, but I'd like to see him get a full year in the AHL before throwing him into the NHL. I think that's better for his development and will make him better as a player. Also, Anders Bjork, who's been injured each of the past 2 years and missed a lot of time, is a guy now that, we really don't know what we have with him. I'm not a huge fan of his. I think he's invisible most of the time. But he's a guy that if there were any injuries on the wings, he's a guy that would come in. And Trent Frederick saw a little bit of NHL time last season. One of my absolute favorite prospects that the Bruins have. He was phenomenal down in Providence last year. Really, really fun player to watch. Physical, tough, not afraid to fight. One of my favorite guys the Bruins have in that pipeline coming up. But they've got a lot of depth. This organization as a whole have a lot of depth. Peter Cehlarik as well. Zach Senyshyn, who I don't think will ever be an NHL player, but he's a guy who could maybe see a call-up. Anton Bleed could maybe see a call-up. This is a team, Urho Vakanainen on the back end. This team has a ton of depth. And I think, injuries will be an issue throughout the season, but they have guys that they can plug in there and take roster spots. So overall, this is, in my mind, a tremendous lineup. This is a team that, was in the finals last year and brought back almost the exact same team. They're in very good shape. I think it's going to be another year where Boston is maybe not the best team in the league, but near the top of the league as far as where they're at. And I certainly expect them to easily make the playoffs. I certainly expect them to, be competitive in the playoffs. I mean, with the current playoff format, I mean, it's extremely competitive, and just because a team's, really good in the regular season does not mean that they'll even get out of the first round, especially those 2-3 matchups. They're just so evenly matched. And Boston's in a very good division, at least where the top of the division is very, very good, with Tampa Bay, Toronto, Boston, Florida presumably being much better, Montreal trying to become a playoff team. I mean, it's going to be a dogfight all year. It's going to be a tough, nothing's going to be handed to them. But this lineup is so good, and this team is so good, and where they were just last season, I expect them to be one of the premier teams in the NHL again this season. So with that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description below. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon and merchandise store are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.